What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason Vinson. I am a wedding and documentary photographer based out of Northwest Arkansas. Today I have Natalie Kesar here to talk about the business of photojournalism. So we're going to be talking about some fun things like pitching, some cool apps that you can use. We got choosing collaborators, self-promotion, all kinds of fun things. But real quick, if you didn't catch the previous video, we talked a little bit about storytelling, so make sure to check that out. But for those that are tuning in fresh, Natalie, give us a quick little intro into who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Natalie Kesar. I am a documentary photographer based in Brooklyn, New York. And my work largely focuses on civil unrest, conflict, and migration. I used to be based in Venezuela and covering a lot of Latin America. I still do occasionally, but these days my work is largely focused on Ukraine and the U.S.
Cool. And Canon Explorer of Light, correct?
Yes. I said that
Very cool.
again. Canon EOL. Canon's the best. I shoot on Canon, and I love them very
much. Awesome. So let's go ahead and just dive into. So the very first topic. So for those just tuning in, I got a list of 5 things that she wanted to talk about, and instead of choosing one, I decided to try and choose all 5 of them, and she gracefully accepted. So we're just going to go through all 5 of these topics. And the first one is grant and comps apps.
So first of all, I really want to preface this conversation about business by saying that it's hilarious that I'm on a podcast talking about how to run a business, because the reason that I'm talking about these things is because I developed a workshop with my partner, Daniella to start to talk about how to do photojournalism better. We're going to be talking about throughout the course of this podcast, basically to share all the things we learned the hard way. And when I say I learned about photojournalism the hard way, I mean really hard, because I'm really bad at business. So hopefully these tips can be helpful for the majority of everyone whose business acumen is probably better than mine. But this is sort of stuff that I feel like is like a fail safe if you, like me, are terrible at numbers and self-promotion, but really, really want to do documentary photography because you love it. So that said, starting with grants and competitions, which, for I think most of your listeners who, are interested in or, dabbling in or full-time professionals as photographers know that, grant funding and photo competitions are a really big part of our business, for better and worse. And, in documentary photography and photojournalism, comps there's so many big ones, World Press, POII. There's American Photography. There's so many out there that come and go, but they are really amazing resources for inspiration in terms of seeing what work is winning, what work is getting made. And for photographers, they're a great way to get your name out there. And I feel like it's also a source of a lot of stress and heartbreak, because the competition for these things is really, really fierce. And you can sort of feel like if you're not winning things that you, that you're nothing to do. It's very easy to have it affect your confidence. And and obviously grant funding for projects is an incredible resource. When you get some money to finally, some jury of your peers says, yes, we believe in you, and here's some money to keep doing what you're doing. That's an incredible, both practically and emotionally, and also it's really hard because applying for these things means you're going to get rejected a whole lot, and so in the workshops that I teach, we talk a lot about both how to create successful applications, a lot of strategizing around that, and a lot of sort of pulling back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes that I think can be super helpful, because otherwise it can seem really opaque, and you're uploading your photos and you don't know, but you've got a project that you've been working on for a year, and you've got 200 that you love and 50 that you think are good, and you're supposed to whittle it down to 10. And how do you even do that? Well, depends a lot on exactly which grant and exactly which competition. There's a lot of different ways to strategize. And then also thinking of actually the process of applying to these things every year or whenever you're feeling ready to, as a really good way to sort of center yourself and think about how to put your best foot forward, checking in on your projects and seeing what the best possible representation of them is, and then really having it be sort of a moment to yourself for yourself and for your work where you're really like clarifying and consolidating, write-ups of what you're doing and why, and figuring out the best way to visually represent that quickly. Because a lot of, most applications are going to get in front of a jury for a couple of minutes, and that's it. They're going to get rejected unless they're looking really good, and then they might dig into them longer. So, there's a whole lot of strategy, and actually an entire class in me and Daniella's upcoming workshops in New Orleans that we sort of really dig into. But they, finding out what grants and competitions are looking for work like yours, and making the practice of just submitting to stuff every couple of months, making sure you're getting your name out there, you're getting your work out there, you're editing to put your best foot forward, and knowing that even, even if you lose, which you will more than you win, because because it's tons of applications and few winners, you're getting your work in front of people that you really want to be seeing your work, and sometimes great things come from that. And yeah, also trying to sort of like, we talk a lot about keeping your motivation up, and like, I have a practice that whenever I get a rejection letter, I apply to something else, and I really, really try to channel the bad energy from rejection into like a new source of hope, which is like maybe a little bit so we're like masochistic, but whatever, it works.
It's a good way to spin negative into something that could end up being a positive, right?
Try.
Yeah. Is there like a specific place that you go to look for grants?
Yeah, I mean, for our workshop participants, Dee has an amazing list, which I sometimes like, I'm like, oh wait, this is for our students. Like, let me look at it. It's like an incredible resource. But also, I use the Picture platform a lot. What I love about Picture is that it like saves your applications, and it's the platform that a ton of different competitions and grants use. So you can have an edit of photographs and your statements and your captions all saved in there, and then just sort of adapt it and change the statement length and re-edit a little bit. But like once you have your stuff in there, then you can kind of check once a month for what deadlines are coming up and just keep applying, because so much of this really is a volume game of just trying to get the work out there and see what sticks. And a Picture's great for that because you don't have to redo it every time. Of course, there are a lot of great competitions that don't use that platform. Then you have to do more work, which is a bummer. But sometimes you have to work for a living, apparently.
Favorite is when I apply to competitions and they all want all of the images at different resolutions. So you have to so I have all of these different actions. It's like, okay, resize this image at 1080, at 2000, at 1600, at 1200. It's like,
no. It's maddening, and I feel like there's always like one digit off. Like it's always like, oh, I could almost reuse that completely, but now I'm gonna have to redo it completely.
The worst is there's one, I can't remember which one it is that I entered, that it has to be at a specific resolution, and then it also has like a maximum file size. And so for some reason, I have some files that even though it's at that resolution, I can't get it below a certain file size, even if I save it at like 4 quality on Photoshop and stuff. And so it's like, I guess I'm not entering this photo. It's too much work.
I've definitely come up against the technicality wall before, where I'm like, you know what? I just want to say,
isn't worth it.
One's not.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to. That's a good validation of if it's worthy of entering. If it's worth the work to resize it.
Yeah. I'm also like the least technical photographer in human history, and so many times I like look at like if the rules are too complicated, I'm just like,
yeah, never mind. Awesome. All right, so the next one is going to be pitching. So, what's the difference between like pitching and applying for grants? And what are some tips for getting a good pitch and finding people to pitch to?
Good question. I mean, so yeah, pitching, I feel like, and we talked about this a little bit in storytelling, but to me, like pitching is the most like underrated way to promote yourself, get your name out there, introduce yourself to editors, and also like steer your career in the direction that you want it to go. Um, because, you know, look, documentary photography is an incredibly competitive, oversaturated industry. There's so many people out here wanting to publish their projects and get assignments. And by offering ideas instead of just sort of, hey, I'm available, you are giving, you're just give offering so much more value to potential clients when you're giving ideas of cool things that they could publish, right? And so, and you're also uh, reminding people what you're interested in and what you're plugged into. So for me, whenever I see something that I'd really like to shoot, whether it's like a 1 day thing or a week-long thing, whether it's an international story or just like something that I could do at home in New York for an afternoon, I really try to sit down and like think about, okay, what publication would be interested in this? And let me just like write up a quick pitch and send it to them. And like, sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I shoot it anyways because I want to for myself. Sometimes I'm maybe not going to do it if I'm not getting paid, and that's okay too. But either way, every time you do that, you're putting yourself on the radar of potential commissioners, letting them know what you're interested in, letting them know that you're sort of out here. It's such a different email to receive than, hi, assign me to something,
I'm available if you have anything.
500 people send them the same email today. You know what I'm saying? Like the photo editors are so overworked and oversaturated, and there's so many excellent photographers out there. So it's so different if you have an idea and interests and connections and all of that stuff. So, it's, you know, I feel like it's also much, grants and competitions. It's like, okay, like, you're answering a contest. Like the
They know what they're looking for already. And
yeah, and the percentages are low and the competition is really, really steep, right? And kind of the same if you're just like cold emailing editors being like, I would like you to pick me to shoot the next thing that you want somebody to shoot. But if you're like, hey, this thing is happening, I know the people, I'm all set to do it, say yes and give me a day rate and it's yours, that's like a much more appealing offer. Um, and so, in me and Daniella's workshops, we dig into the actual, like, we're showing like sample pitches and breaking down the mechanics of like how to write a successful pitch, how to, how to figure out how to place it, all of these different things, really digging. That's like a whole sort of like long conversation that would take like the length of this podcast to go into. But, I feel like there's also a lot of just sort of basic like recipes in terms of how to contact people, what you want to say, what you don't want to say, who to contact in the first place, how to find that, but I think it's a really, really useful and underrated tool in terms of breaking in and staying in the industry.
imagine, or have there ever been situations where you like pitch someone an idea and they're like, no, but that's kind of similar to this other thing that we have going on. Do you want to do that instead?
And sometimes it's not right away. I've sent pitches to editors and they didn't respond, which, it's something that
More often than not.
to for people to recognize that like the state of the industry is that I think most of our editors, if they responded to every email, they would never sleep again, right? Like that they're just the volume they're getting is huge. But like, so send a pitch out into the ether, get no response ever, like be like, oh, you don't love me, I suck, I'm an imposter. And 6 months later, they're like, hey, would you be interested in this thing? And it's very similar to that pitch. They're like, I remember that you pitched this thing, so I know you're interested in it, or this community or whatever, and that's great. So I've had that process unfold over like multiple years, an editor that I cold emailed several times never responds. I think they hate me. 5 years later, I start working with them about the sort of subject matter that I've been pitching. So, it's a big, big lesson, and don't give up.
Do you have to use any sort of special tools? Because I imagine whenever you're writing a pitch, you obviously want it to be short and sweet because they're just gonna give it a quick glance. Um, but then obviously your work is visually based, and so you can't load up an email with a portfolio or anything like that. So you're just trying to keep like a short and sweet piece of text, and then do you link them to somewhere with more information if they want to dive down the rabbit hole, or are you just waiting until they reply in order to give them more details?
This is funny. This is actually like a fight that Daniella and I have been having for years. Danielle is a PDF girl and Link to a gallery girl. And it's like an arm wrestling match that we usually like have in front of our students. And I think that there's there's pluses and minuses for both approaches, but what you're saying is exactly right. You want to keep it short and sweet, but you want to, especially if the editor doesn't know your work, you want to show, what it would look like.
Static is what you do. Yeah.
So like it of course it depends on whether you're talking about something that's happening in the future, in which case you're more showing work that uh, reflects you know your style and your photography, or if you're talking about an existing project, then you're going to want to, put together like a tight pitch gallery or PDF, Daniela. Depending on your chosen strategy and which one of us you love more.
Cool. So I think the next topic is perfect because you mentioned it, and so I had a question, but it fits it right in. So how to negotiate pricing, day rates, licensing, and all of that stuff. Give us like some quick tips on how do you come up with a day rate? How do you know that you're not like undercutting yourself or overselling yourself or all that fun stuff? And then I think a lot of people struggle with licensing as far as like how much of their work do they need to give for what price and how long do they need to give it and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, this is so important. Like, and this is one of the huge reasons we started teaching these workshops is because I started to realize that nobody ever taught me this. It was all sort of word of mouth stuff that I would like hear from photographer friends, and also I noticed increasingly that my students, or whether I'm visiting or guest teaching at universities and photojournalism programs or working with students or mentees who are recent graduates, like people are not learning this stuff. And it's really, really important that we all know how it works and that we all know how to best advocate for the best rates possible, because that, like
Setting the bar for everyone else.
it's all ships or whatever the expression is, like, you know, every lowball screws us all over, right? Like so learning these strategies is so important. And I learned it by blowing it all the time and then eventually figuring it out from my peers. And of course I feel like also like, in our culture and in many cultures, it's a little awkward to talk about money, but the reality in photojournalism is that day rates have basically been static with some minor increases for like the last like what 20, 30 years. It was just making it incredibly difficult to sustain a living in this industry. That means we really need to advocate for the best rates possible. And so there's very different formulas depending on which, and I'm sure you could teach me a ton about how to do rates in wedding photography, for instance. But most publications have set day rates. So, for example, if you're out, you're talking to, a national newspaper, so day rates are. I don't think this is like. I don't think anybody's going to be mad at me to say this since I haven't said any specific news. Like everybody's day rates are hovering around $500 a day, right? And I think being transparent and open about that is like really, really important. That covers, your shooting time. Most magazines have a day rate that's maybe that or a little bit higher, but they also cover post-production. They might even cover research. They might even, and what many people don't know is that they also have a stipend for gear rentals or for renting yourself your own gear. There's travel days. There's so many things that you can charge for that often young photographers are not aware they can charge for, or they're trying to be sort of crowd pleasers or look professional, so they don't want to ask, right? So the first thing that I advise everyone to do is to ask their editors what's covered, right? Because especially when you're working on assignment for a publication, that game is much less about trying to sort of play battleship and name your highest price, and much more about just finding out what they cover. Some wonderful editors will send you a sheet of like, this is, we cover travel, we cover research, we cover an assistant to this much, we cover gear up to this much, we cover per diem for food and da 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 da. We don't cover X, Y, and Z. Other times you really need to, hey, what's covered? Because all of the expenses add up to the difference between being able to make a living in this industry or not, right? So, it's just figuring out all of that and making sure that you're not leaving any money on the table with publications. When you're talking about corporate work, commercial work, licensing, there's tools like the Getty Image Calculator to find out, okay, where you're asking your client, how are you going to use this image, and then finding out what the appropriate licensing range for that image would be. But two tools that we talk about a lot in the workshops and like dig into how to do more practically, in different circumstances, is always get the client to say their number first. Never, ever, ever, maybe not never, ever, but like generally speaking, you always want to get them to answer what's your budget before they say, before you answer what's your fee. And, you've seen the memes of like the quick draw on the internet, like, what's your budget? I just do not be answering that question until they answer what's your budget. I'll go back and forth on email like an idiot, like 1,000 times, They're like, hey, what's your rate? And I'm like, cool. Yeah, tell me about the scope of work. What's your budget? No, hear you. What's your budget? You really want to find out that number because it prevents you from leaving money on the table, right? You need to know where their head's at. Then you probably want to ask for more. Daniella always asks for more money. And I think that's really important because very few people are going to quote you their max price. And there's a lot of strategies that, that we dig into that are talking about how to do this diplomatically. But it's so important for our industry. The worst case scenario that I see all the time is people working for exposure or exploitatively low rates because they're young and they're trying to build their book or whatever.
That's how I get my foot in the door. And
and everybody has to pay dues and everybody has to work for pretty shitty money at the beginning of their career. But please, nobody work for free. It screws over all of us. People start to believe they can get their images for free and then none of us can eat. And so, never work for free. Always ask for what you're worth and always understand that you might think you're going to get your foot in the door working for free or working for really shitty money and not asking too many questions about the money. But in reality, you give us a cookie, like
you become known as the cheap photographer. Yeah.
Client, or it'll turn into like a really, really crappy paying client. And like, you really want, something that I talk about a lot with my clients is like, when they're offering a rate that's unfair, I'm like, hey, that's below industry standards. And, I, from a standpoint of supporting my industry and in solidarity with all of the other workers in this field, I have to demand a living wage. And, and I frame it that way, really like trying to sort of educate clients as well as being like, I get that you're like thinking like, oh, we just need to take some pretty pictures and that's like a pretty fun thing to do, but like, this is how I pay my rent. And if
don't punish me because I like what I do.
Yeah. Like, I still get emails, offering to shoot for exposure where I'm like, bro, I have nothing but exposure. I work for, all these media clients where like, I am exposed. I can't eat that. None of us can eat that, and so I think sometimes it can be hard psychologically for people to say, they don't want to be demanding, they don't want to rock the boat, they don't want to like scare the client. But I think it's really, really important to cultivate an ability to speak to your clients and just be like, look, I really want to do this for you. And I'm like, I'm not trying to price gouge you. I'm willing to do this for as reasonable a fee as I can afford to make a living, and you can afford to pay me well. But like, let's actually have this conversation, and let me help you understand how much it costs in terms of hours, gear, preparation, travel, et cetera, to get this done for you, and let's make something fair. And I also, I think people are really pleasantly surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised by when rather than getting into some like competition of like me trying to charge the most and you trying to charge the least, where I kind of level with people and I'm like, look, okay, you quoted this, I can do it for this. I would like to charge this, and I think that would be more standard, but let's like find some space in the middle and really just open it up as a conversation rather than make it this sort of tug of war. People, want to pay fair if you speak about it in those terms.
What I've seen work really good in the past is like sometimes, especially if it's a new company and they don't really like, there's that whole client education thing, like they just don't know what standard practices are. It could be a really good way to get your foot in the door, as well as educate them on the rates of being like, hey, this is what standard is. I realize you might not have the budget for this specific project because you didn't know any better. So I'm willing to do it for this with the understanding that all future projects are going to be at this budget. And so that they have that expectation moving forward, not only for using you in the future, but like this is what industry standard is. And so if you really want to work with anyone decent in the future, this is what you're going to need to be at for any sort of future projects.
Totally. I mean, I send the exact email like with frequency, and it's really like, and that's a win-win for everybody because you still get your new client, you don't sticker shock them, and they're more educated. I'm also like, I recently had the experience of walking into a shoot where they like, honest mistake, they just didn't know, but they had like booked me for an event, and then they were trying to piggyback a ton of other different types of shoots. Like they were like, okay, while you're here, we're gonna have you do like, my wedding portraits and our headshots, and like, can you just quickly shoot my passport photos, and I was like, bro, you don't own me for this time. Like, in the sense that like you don't commission a furniture builder to build a chair and then while they're there be like, oh, like you have an extra 15 minutes, can we get a kitchen table and some cabinets, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
And like 5 other chairs, please.
yeah. Like, but like these were well-intentioned, sweet people that just legit did not know that. And
Like, while
so
she's here, we might as well have her do this and photograph this. And yep.
and so I was just like, okay, hey, client, let's talk real quick. Do you want me to build a chair, charge for the chair, or do you want me to like do this whole thing? And then we were going to end up negotiating a much higher rate for a day. Here's your menu, choose your own adventure, and it ended up working out fine. But it's, I think like, feeling confident enough to express those needs, recognize your own worth. And sometimes it's about, even if you feel like an imposter and it's scary for you to insist on a fair wage, which shouldn't be, but I know that feels that way for a lot of people, especially when you're starting out. Remembering that you're not just doing that for yourself, you're doing that for the whole industry is really important.
How often, as a photojournalist that's getting sent out on assignment, are you generally getting paid a day rate and they just get all images or all delivered files and they get to use them as is? Or are you getting paid for a day rate and then you're charging usages to that publication for a specific story, and if they want to use it anywhere else, they have to pay extra?
Depends a lot on the contract for each individual publication, and also standards have evolved over the course of my career. But the general format is you're shooting a day rate, they are getting your edited caption, like your tone caption selects. They're not like nobody except for National Geographic asks for all of your photos, and that's because of like traditions and inner workings very specific to National Geographic. But generally speaking, you're giving them tone selects, which could be 5 to 10 from a portrait shoot, or like 50 for like a day of reportage shooting some situation or more. And then in most cases, the publication would end up having rights to use those images in their publication in an editorial context. And then you, in all cases, at least for me, unless you're working for a wire agency, you retain the copyright of those images and have the right to resell them or would relicense them if the publication wanted to do something else. So the publication retains like rights to do what they need to do for their news coverage, and you on all the other rights, and you could license, resell, with respect to convention. Obviously, like if I'm shooting for the New York Times and they commission a story, they have an embargo period that I'm not going to license to anybody else within that embargo period.
6 month exclusivity or something like that.
They're like 3. It also depends on the story and depending on how delicate or how exclusive it is. There's like contractual exclusivity, which I'm going to respect, but then also, there's also situations where even if the embargo is over, I might like holler at my editor and be like, this was yours. Are you comfortable? Or there's other situations where maybe I really know that they are not going to care particularly about the embargo, where I might write them and be like, totally fine to say no, but would you be comfortable with me licensing this to a German publication in a foreign language? And they're like, yeah, we don't care, go for it. But it's sort of a case-by-case basis.
So we have 2 more topics, but real quick, we've kind of touched on your guys' workshop. And so you have an in-person workshop coming up as well as some Zoom workshops that you do throughout the year. Can you go ahead and just like give people a quick little rundown of what that is, what it looks like?
Yeah, so my partner Daniella and I founded a workshop series during COVID, which was started out the first couple of years with they were like weekend intensive workshops on Zoom going over a very popular workshop that I'm referencing a lot here called The Business, which is just looking at like the business of photojournalism and all the nuts and bolts of this. And we taught about it for 16 hours, 8 hours a day for 2 days over the weekend, and people loved it. And we've woven basically all of that programming plus a ton of stuff about storytelling, long-term projects, style, ethics, all, kind of, we're really trying to teach like everything that we think is important about photojournalism, that we think is like, the greatest hits, what you really need to know if you're doing this practice as a professional or want to start, into a 4-day workshop in New Orleans, where Daniella lives. This will be our second one. We did one last year. It's October 3rd through 6th. Links will be where the links go in this podcast or on my socials or on Daniella's socials. And it's honestly, it's an exhilarating and totally exhausting, super intense 4 days where we're teaching so much about the topics, these business topics, and, really, really digging into how to practically make this work. Because so many people, I think, would really love to be able to make a living from photojournalism, but it seems like impossible, right? It's like, okay, but like how would you actually make money for this? And frankly, as the industry contracts, because publishing is contracting, it's becoming even more difficult. And so we're really trying to just open up like all of the sort of gate-kept playbook in terms of breaking into the industry, promoting yourself, dealing with the money, pitching grants, all of this stuff. Every strategy that we have that Daniella and I have learned over our, at this point, pretty long careers together, and also a lot of learning the hard way by making mistakes. We're really trying to just open it up and give everybody the toolbox and pack as much information as possible into this weekend. And it's also fun. There's like pizza parties and we're hanging out at breweries, and you'll be shooting assignments in the New Orleans community, but we've sort of hand curated for our students. And you also have the option to pick your own if you prefer. We have a really fun community show at the end. And also from a business perspective, we're bringing in portfolio reviewers from amazing institutions and publications who are going to be looking at your work. So you're actually going to get that FaceTime. It's really cool. And we hope that it's also like really practical, coming from 2 people who are currently making our livings from this industry and able to sort of share all the current realities, which are changing all the time.
And so for those that missed the previous video about storytelling, give us a quick little rundown of who Daniella is, because she was initially supposed to be part of this chat, but I had to reschedule. So give us a little bit of a rundown of who the other instructor is for this workshop.
So Daniella Saltzman is a incredible top of her game, one of the best working photojournalists out there right now, long time regular contributor to National Geographic, I met her when we were both sort of permalancing at the Wall Street Journal in New York City, where we both got our starts. And I mean, she's also a regular contributor to many, many other publications. She also does a lot of long-term grant-based deep work within, more sort of community-based work, collaborative, fine art work, book works. She's for works in museums. She has an incredible long-term project called Signs of Our Identity, looking at Native American boarding schools and human rights violations, and doing a lot of incredible collaborative work with those communities. She is a professor of photojournalism at Tulane University and the founder of Women Photograph, which is an incredible organization that's given a lot of rights and support to women photographers, which, photojournalism continues to be a very male-dominated industry. That said, these workshops are separate from Women Photograph. They're open to men. They're open to anyone who wants to come. Dudes, don't be scared. Y'all are so invited. But yeah, Dee's been one of my best friends since we were the only chicks on the Wall Street Journal roster a million years ago, and we kind of came up together. And she's also like one of the funniest people I've ever met in my entire life. We have a lot of fun. She's incredibly type A and organized, and I'm incredibly not and disorganized, and so that is how things get done behind the scenes in our workshops. Dee being organized and me being a mess, but somehow it all works out. Missing her today, but if you sign up for our workshops, there'll be a whole lot of hanging out with us in and out of the classroom.
Very cool. And before we dive into the next two topics, the last question for the workshop, just to touch on, there is some support, right, from Catchlight. They have like some sponsorships and stuff like that.
Thank you so much. This is our second recording, and I'm obviously missing things. So thanks for catching that down. Yeah, last year was our first in-person workshop in New Orleans, and something that we've come up against over the course of all of these workshops on Zoom and in person is we always have so many more scholarship applications than we can accommodate, just because there's only two of us and it's a small shop. So this year, the wonderful folks at Catchlight, which is an organization that supports photography and photographers doing work that, you should check them out. I'm sure we can link to them. They're supporting incredible projects out there. And they are supporting 10 75% scholarships. So that's 75% off tuition for 10 photographers and 50% off scholarships for this year's cohort. So the class is going to be small and intimate. It's capped at 20 people. We really want to make sure that the experience that everybody's having is a lot of one-on-one interactions with us and the other photographers, that, there's space for long conversations with the portfolio reviewers, etc. And so 15 of those spots are going to have financial aid provided by Catchlight, which is huge for us this year because it's a lot less people needing to pay full tuition. So please apply, and please apply early if you're interested, because the competition does get really, really fierce for those financial aid spots. We always have, honestly, more students who we absolutely would admit tomorrow than we can accommodate. So please check out our website. Let me know. Send me a DM or an email if you have questions. As I said in the last podcast, I hate DMs, and I absolutely will not answer them under any circumstances unless it's about our workshop, and then I totally will. But even better to write me an email because I pay more attention to that thing. So hit us up, please apply, and thank you so much to Catchlight for sponsoring the workshop.
Now, after that little bit of self-promotion, the next topic is actually self-promotion. So how do you self-promote yourself as, a photojournalist, storyteller, and things like that?
So, I feel like there's no right way to do this. Daniella, this is one of the situations in the workshop where Daniella and I have very different strategies. She does a lot of making, prints and cards and, really sort of thoughtful things of that nature. Because again, very disorganized and chaotic, I use the internet. I Instagram and I pitch, and those are for me, they're the two ways that and honestly, I'm obsessed with my stories and I work really hard about them, and I babble like a psycho about them to anybody who will listen, just because I'm enthusiastic. And I think that, self-promotion in documentary photography space is tricky because you don't want to be like a snake oil salesman out here, like, hey, really sexy story about other people's lives. Terrible thing happened. Like, but also we have to eat and this is a business, right? So you're always trying, but I find that, for me, Instagram is and has been for my career an incredible tool because it's basically built for us. You can get your work out there, you can share how you feel about that. Our community can share and, highlight things that we all feel is important. And then I also do a lot of pitching, which, I touched on before, which I think is a really important way to self-promote and also get your name out there to editors. And, there's, again, we have like whole classes devoted to the mechanics of it, in terms of like what are like the best practices to use all these different tools, whether it's sending out emails, attending workshops and networking opportunities, trying to make meetings with people, sending, cards and promotional materials and this sort of thing, or, just using Instagram or TikTok or whatever, the socials you're into. But I think there's whatever cocktail kind of comes naturally for you. I think it's something we talk about a lot in terms of promoting yourself in like an authentic way is always going to come out, in terms of sharing your enthusiasm and using platforms and mediums that work for you is always going to work a lot better than something that doesn't feel comfortable. And that's going to resonate with people differently. I think it's a game of patience and a game of continually making work that you're excited to share, and then finding people that you think would share that excitement about that type of work. And it's hard and it takes a long time. But when I got into photojournalism, I was told that it was dead and there was no way to make a career out of it anymore. And I think there's always a way. So
last topic before we end is choosing collaborators. So is this topic kind of in line with the self-promotion and Instagram aspect, or what do you mean by choosing collaborators?
that's really about finding your audience and finding your market, right? And that's really important, because I think that like, first you want to figure out like, okay, what's my style? What kind of photography do I want to be making, both in terms of, do I want to be photographing long-term projects? Do I want to be photographing breaking news? Do I want to be photographing celebrities, lifestyle, food? Like what are you into? Who is publishing work like that and paying for it, whether it be newspapers, magazines, online publications, ads, client, like more sort of sponsored content. I mean, there's all different ways to do this stuff. And increasingly the lines are getting somewhat blurrier depending on what, niche you're interested in. But really sort of paying attention to who's publishing what editors' visions do you vibe with? Also, it's super important. Who edits your work is going to define a lot of what it looks like, and finding people that you do your best work with and want to do your best work for is a really important part of this. Finding those partnerships and sticking with them. I love working with editors who I know demand my best from me and also edit in a way that's going to make my work like more than I could imagine it. And those people are really, really hard to find, and they're gold. So cultivating those relationships, paying attention to who's publishing what, also in terms of pitching, like, you don't pitch a sports story to Bon Appetit. You would think that that's like obvious, but sometimes people are like mass emailing or, figuring out who works for what section and what they deal with. And, don't